a bipartisan group of senators, a concept as believable as unicorns and the Loch Ness Monster, resumed border talks Thursday, offering a distant glimmer of hope, which is about as good as we can hope from Congress these days, that they might pass a legislative package that would include aid for Israel and Ukraine before the end of the year. Here's hope against hope. And yet another vacation for our amazing lawmakers who never tire of working around the clock for us. I am kidding. The lead negotiators, Senators Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, and James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, met Thursday afternoon. Lankford and a Democratic source familiar with the negotiations told NBC News the meeting did not yield a final result, but a new proposal was discussed, both said. It took place in the basement hideaway office of Senator Kristen Sinema, independent of Arizona, who apparently has a hideaway office in the basement. And she has been involved in the effort as well. The two sides are reportedly very far apart still, shocking nobody. But don't worry, they also have barely any time to get it done. The source said conversations will continue remotely Friday and into the weekend as senators left Washington, D.C. for the week on Thursday. Quote, amazingly, we have phones and internet and email and everything else, so we'll continue to stay in contact, Lankford said to reporters as he left the Capitol. We're going to continue to talk, said Murphy. The negotiations stalled last week. Then yesterday, the Senate failed to advance an Israel and Ukraine aid bill over Republican objections to it that it lacked immigration policy changes completely unrelated to funding both the war efforts in Ukraine and Israel, because unrelated things should be tied together for some reason. As I've said since the beginning of time, a do-nothing Congress should not try to multitask, but that does not stop them from doing so and making it very hard to even get behind the concept of one idea when that one idea is three ideas, if not more, all at the same time. Lankford and other Republicans said that President Joe Biden's remark on Wednesday that he was willing to make significant compromises on the border, folks, in order to secure money for Ukraine helped bring the two sides back to the table. But with Congress set to leave town for the end of the year, at the end of next week, Lankford admitted they would likely need to add more legislative days if they wanted to finish a deal before that happened. So that is where we are. I would love to hear David Shuster weigh in.
Well, politically, I think the Democrats would be wise to essentially cut and give the Republicans what they want on the border. I mean, poll after poll has shown that the Democrats are bleeding support because of what people perceive at the border. It's not an open border, as Republicans say, but there has been a huge influx, and the Democrats are getting killed politically for that. But people are actually getting really killed in Ukraine because Ukraine is running out of munitions. So Ukraine seems to be the pressing issue in terms of humanity, in terms of protecting the Ukrainians from the Russian advances and making sure they can continue to fight back. Because Ukraine is so urgent, and because politically it's so urgent for the Democrats, I think, to show that they're willing to acknowledge that the border needs to be strengthened, that there need to be more border agents or whatever it is. And I just think it's wise politically for the Democrats to move past this. So I do hope they will concede, that they'll give the Republicans a little bit more on immigration and on border agents, and that they can then actually give some munitions and more money to Ukraine and also to Israel.
Sure.
I agree. Perception is reality. Okay, it just is what it is. And sometimes this is the way I raised my daughter, right or wrong. You're making a lot of noise, kid. It's almost bedtime. Go ahead, have some more ice cream. Okay, I can't fight everything, not every night. So sometimes I have to give in. There's a greater good here, a greater cause. Maybe I was on deadline, I had something to do. Have the ice cream. The Republicans are all over the place. They like this mythical thing they call policy. So I agree with David. Go ahead and get this Ukraine aid established, renewed, and let people live. And everyone can go ahead and go home for their break. I was a bit peeved by Lankford's statements about, oh, we have Zoom and we've got phones. Like, what are you asking for? We're hanging out. We did it for 24 hours in her lounge in the basement, cinemas. And now you guys need to get off our backs. But I don't know necessarily what the Democrats, when President Biden says, I'm going to, give up some things, what remains? Okay, what are we going to have? Barbed wire? Does that remain? I just want to know what the details are. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point because the devil's always in the details. And currently, as I understand it, the Republican demands, because I agree with you, Schuster, we can give on the border as a nation collectively to protect our border better. We certainly need to do that. It certainly is a problem. There are certainly huge numbers that currently are pouring through, and there's no way to know what amount of those are legitimate cases when they escape into the country and cannot be accounted for. No doubt, at the same time, their current demands seem to be closing the border entirely, which cuts off the ability of asylum to genuine asylum claims, people genuinely escaping murder, terror in their home countries. And that's so much of what America stands for, is being a place that allows people to come and to seek refuge. And that seems to be not a priority of the Republicans very often at all. In fact, I was amused last week to see, instead, as the Republican media establishment, as well as many in Congress, like to do, instead of legislating, instead of coming up with reasonable, possible, legitimate proposals, turn everything into a political issue, showing video of people pouring through a hole in the wall and saying, look at Biden's border, when literally there was a hole in the supposedly impenetrable, perfect wall. A perfect wall. You can't, we did prototypes and we had the best climbers in the world climbing. You can't get through this wall. They literally just like popped one of those bars out and people were passing through freely and turning that into yet another political wedge issue. And so the devil is going to be in those details. And I a little bit fear that in the rush to make a deal before a deadline, we may end up giving too much that could affect the humanity of people coming here seeking refuge on the other side.
That's a good point. And yeah, to be fair, I mean, look, I think the Democrats would say you want double, triple the number of border agents, fine. You want more money for the wall, that's fine. But to the point that Republicans are making of, oh, well, we cannot allow these immigrants to get any health or education services in the United States at all, whether they're asylum seekers or not. Yeah, I do think Democrats need to draw the line at a certain point. But again, the Democrats need to, I think, show the public at least that they are willing to strengthen the security and the border of the wall, and then paint the Republicans as, well, they're the ones who don't want to take care of people and want to harm people actually when they're here. And the sooner the Democrats can get back to the cutting edge issue that has sort of helped them on all these off-year races, abortion, women's rights, women's reproductive rights, that's where the Democrats are in better shape for 2024. If we're having a debate about the border, I think the Democrats are in shaky ground.
Yeah, very interesting.
I agree with that. Oh yeah, just it's time. You know, everybody has to at some point say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'll give you more rope and I'll let you go ahead if you might hang yourself. I don't know. But I think that that's appropriate at this time. There comes a time where, did Kenny Rogers have that song? Got to know when to.
Got to know when to hold them.
That right? Part. I think you have to do that. Even the football coach, Tuberville, finally, didn't he give in on something recently? So I do think David's right. Like, take this disadvantage, even though it's framed improperly, it's flat out lies in some instances, and throw it right back at them and say, okay, we're good. Let's do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just a technical point about Kenny Rogers, the gambler. He says you never count your money when you're sitting at the table, which literally goes against all poker logic. You have to count it. It's based on the amount of your stack versus the opponent's stack. And if you don't count your money, you will be at a significant disadvantage. So sometimes a song is just a song. I'm curious your guys' thought as to one of the other things holding up this package is there's now a big call for putting restrictions or stipulations more than normal on the aid package to Israel. To my mind, of course, always any aid package comes with the understanding and the stipulation that it needs to follow international law and American law even to be able to operate under the norms that we do. But do you think this issue is being politicized at a time when our steadfast ally of Israel needs that money and does not need it politicized? Or do you think that's a legitimate pause, a part of the pause?
Can I say yes and no? Okay, and here's why. I do think that we should put stipulations. How far? We can have that debate. But because I think we do that in other cases as well, and we have done that in other cases as well, but it is political. Okay, the Biden administration has gotten itself in a precarious position, and boy, it's an election coming up. And so this is how they're handling it, by kind of floating that out there. But I also think Benjamin Netanyahu is He's got to be, I don't want to say handled, but handled. He's got to be held accountable in some way. Again, what way, how much, debatable. I think the Israeli people will do that and are doing that to check him where they see fit. But we are in the middle of a war, he would say, and he does need the assistance. But I do think it can't just be limitless. There has to be something placed on it to keep him in check.
Schuster.
I think Sharon's spot on. And in fact, I would say that if there was some way that we could push Netanyahu out and say, oh yeah, we'll give you X number of $1 billion, but you have to get rid of Netanyahu, I'd be in favor of that. It can't happen, of course, because we don't have that sort of control over Israel. But I do think it's smart for the Biden administration. Look, the polls have changed since October 7th, unfortunately. And there are great concerns that American people have about what's happening in Gaza and whether the United States is somehow aiding in the killing of innocent people. So to that extent, sure, if we want to say to the Israelis, look, we're going to give you aid, but a certain amount has to go to Gaza relief, a certain amount can go to military, a certain amount can go to economic relief, that's fine. I think the Israelis would be fine with that. They can figure it out and they can figure out where they need to put the resources. And I don't think that's a difficult one. But it is important for the United States, I think, to show some sensitivity to. We have a large section of this country which is becoming increasingly isolationist. They don't want U.S. involvement in Ukraine. They don't want U.S. money going towards Israel. They want money being spent at the border. And I think it would be wise and incumbent upon Democrats in the Biden administration to be acknowledging that, to be sensitive to it, give the Israelis something that is sort of perhaps has certain restrictions on it, hope that the Israelis will kick Netanyahu out for allowing October 7th to begin with, and then let everybody sort of move on.
Yeah, I think a lot of that needs to be deeply investigated, and a lot of that hopefully will happen when the war is complete. But I do think that I just want to, because one point that's been, I think, very twisted that I've made on air since this war began, and people like to twist it and say, oh, when I say that we should continue supporting our ally of Israel in this war effort, they say that, oh, I'm endorsing somehow, or anybody in this position is endorsing the killing of innocent Palestinians, which is absurd. As I said in a debate with Cenk on air, it's just the concept of war that people are recoiling at, and that I recoil at as well. But all aid to war efforts, all aid to security when a country is then attacked, very sadly leads quite directly, if not indirectly, to the loss of innocent life. That's the nature of war. I pray that the planet evolves to a place where we do not need to ever resort to war as a tactic. But as long as that's the reality of the world that we live in, just because this is the first social media war where we are on both sides seeing horrific things happening, does not mean that we turn our backs on our allies when they are suffering at the hands of an invasion and a terrorist attack from literally a terrorist group that is holding the Gazan people hostage ever since they refused to have another democratic election in the Gaza Strip, since they won by a slim margin and took power over completely. In Ukraine, they were attacked, and nobody says Ukraine should not defend itself, or says, wait a minute, there's also, people on the Russian side that are losing their lives. Loss of life is tragic to any individual. Human beings get dragged into war all of the time, and it's a real tragedy. But it just seems to me that we're allowing public opinion that is being swayed by misinformation, incomplete information, incorrect history to affect our having the back of our long-standing ally, and an ally that has the same values that we do here in America, here in the West, one that is for freedom and democracy and support of all groups. And nobody that criticizes that has any solution for how then to bring true freedom to Palestine, how then to bring true freedom to the people of Gaza, if this terrorist organization that is a radical Islamic fundamentalist group that is hell-bent on the murder of the Jews in Israel and of their own people to that aim, because they think that the death of their own people is martyrdom and a wonderful thing. And many people in the Palestinian territories embrace that ideology and say that, well, our son is a martyr now. How do you ever change that unless you change the power structure that is in control there? And we can't let that be moved by the wind of, oh, people suddenly are being reminded of how terrible war is, and so let's turn our back on our allies and let an evil ideology flourish.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And when we talk about, it takes a certain amount of courage to somehow try to figure out how to solve this, and that we have to sort of find the courage in the instances where we can see it. The example that I just saw the other day was an Al Jazeera of all place, which is funded by Qatar, which also is home to certain Hamas elements. On Al Jazeera, they interviewed, I think, a woman in Gaza who said the problem with aid is that Hamas is siphoning a lot of it, and that the aid is not getting to the people. The aid is going to Hamas, and they're using it for their fight. And I thought, oh my God, for this woman to say this on camera on Al Jazeera, it's almost like you feel, it's like a death wish for her. But the courage that she was able to show and to say, okay, this is a concern that if you're going to give us aid, let's figure out a way to give us aid in a way that actually gets to feeding people who don't have food, who need it, as opposed to resupplying Hamas. If there are more people like that we can find, if we can find those sort of instances of courage, then perhaps the larger problems start to be a little bit easier to try to figure out.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. And Ben, you said something about not knowing history. And in recent weeks, I sat for about 30 minutes with Governor Pennsylvania Shapiro, and he made the same assessment here, that people do not understand truly the history of this thing and how far it goes, and really how recent some of it is. They don't understand it. And I asked him, well, how can we educate people? You got a great film industry in Philadelphia. How can you bring people to the table and spoon feed them, some of these lessons, when we're a USA Today crowd, we're a New York Post crowd. We're not necessarily, a Times crowd. And he said part of it is going to be done in schools, and understanding the Holocaust, and understanding that that's not where Israel was created, that there are some other lessons, important ones, that have to be learned across communities. So it is a difficult situation, but I still believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is not everything, but that's a big part of it, because there are so many who don't trust him. And I'm talking about in Israel, okay? And they don't like what he's done. And yes, our great ally has stood for democracy and all the things that you named and considered. But here's a man who, didn't he recently try to dial that back? And perhaps it's part of the reason he took his eye off the ball. And innocent, beautiful, promising people died. They were slaughtered that day, just trying to fellowship, celebrate. So it's a complicated issue, but I do think that just like, I think that Hamas has to be eradicated. And the people of Israel, I think, can be depended on to figure out their leadership.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've said it on air many times, and I've said it repeatedly. Netanyahu has not been a partner for peace. He has been somebody that has been encouraging the strength of Hamas before this all went down, because they enabled him to not need to re-enter into peace negotiations towards a two-state solution, no doubt. I just wish that moving forward, since we realize all people are people of equal value, that should be on both sides, while we pray for the stopping of the loss of innocent life on the Palestinian side, that we also can help stem the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli sentiment by at least using the proper terms that are actually accurate, by at least acknowledging that it is not a colonial move when colonialism implies there is a original nation that the people need to go, could return to, whereas this is the land of both the Jews and the Arab people since the beginning of humanity, basically. The October 7th attacks were called the Al-Aqsa flood by Hamas because they tied it to defending and trying to stop incursions into the Al-Aqsa mosque. Well, facts again, the Al-Aqsa mosque is built on top of the Jewish temple. And when you build something on top of something, it's because the temple was there before. Yet they claim as though Israel is some colonizing force coming in, when instead it's people who've been in their homeland for thousands of years and are trying to return, in many instances, to their homeland after being kicked out of other places in the world. And so I just hope that people that want a peaceful solution to this, other than platitudes, can actually suggest what can be done to keep both parties, both peoples in safety moving forward, because without safety there cannot be peace, and that has to obviously go both ways.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a Young Turk.